and be able to manifest everything that we desire. So thank you all for joining. Without further ado, I'm going to let Mynoo take it from here. And we'll
Thank
see
you,
what
Catherine.
Pearl of Wisdom is all about.
Thank you, Catherine. So I wrote this Pearl of Wisdom, what we are going to be doing on the flight. And in my flight, I got this vision that, oh, this is like the pot, the treasure pot of the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. And last night we were playing by the lake, with some friends. The kids were playing, and my grandson has had decided all these new tricks he was going to share with me when I arrived. So he's sharing all of that, and the sun just comes out, and then the rain comes, and it's like, oh my God, is there going to be a rainbow? And there was a humongous rainbow right there. And the end of the rainbow was right in the lake, right in front of us. So I thought, this is a sign. It's the perfect time to be doing our Pearl of Wisdom. So I'm very excited to share this with you. And I'm very excited also that language is a Pearl of Wisdom. A Pearl of Wisdom being, if you only ever focused on this one pearl, you actually can experience a world that delivers to everyone, as well as yourself. So let's look at language. Let's go a little deeper into language itself. I remember a professor from Stanford saying to me many, many years ago, he posed a question, and he said, language is to humans as dash is to fish, fill in the blank. And I thought obvious things, but I couldn't quite understand how that was akin to language. And really what it was language is to humans as water is to fish. So at that time, it's like, oh, okay, I guess. But now looking at this Pearl of Wisdom and re-examining that statement in light of that Pearl of Wisdom, what I get to see is, to a fish, the fish is not aware that water is around it. It's surrounded by water until it's out of water. Now, so it's just there. It's its world. It's surrounded by it. It breathes it. It spews it out. This is where it does its social interactions. This is where it does its movement. It's its environment, inside and out. Language, to us as humans, you see, we always think of language as the spoken word, and very little of language is actually spoken. Bulk of it is unspoken. And I already know that energy signatures of whatever it is that we speak are held in the atmosphere. There's a body of work that I'd often do with people, which is about uncovering their money mindset. And in that money mindset, I talk about, once their mindset is uncovered, I talk to them about how money, when it was created with an originating intent of command and control. And so much of how transacting with money has occurred has been driven by command and control. And there's so much languaging, so many words that have been uttered about money, like nothing's, if we don't have money, you can't really do anything. And it's really hard. You've got to work hard to get money. Money doesn't grow on trees. Make sure you save enough for the rainy day. That's lots and lots of conversations. It's not that we hear those conversations every day. It's just that that languaging of that energy vibration is already anchored in the atmosphere. And it's as if our cells are constantly subject to this communication. So we are being communicated to by the energies of the word that have been expressed through language at some point or the other. So absolutely, language is to humans as water is to fish. So we are surrounded by language. And you've also heard me often say that the energy signature of what might have occurred stays in our cells long after any disease is already gone and treated. So given that we are vibrational beings and we live in a vibrational environment, then clearly our words have vibrations. And vibrations don't go anywhere unless you consciously choose for them to be transformed. So hence, language is a pearl of wisdom for us to understand the nuances that are packaged within this language that we use so readily. I'm just going to have to drink water from a bottle. It's 2:30 in the morning. Everybody's asleep. I can't go down and rattle around the glasses. The house is full of lots of human beings. Okay, so let's look at, first of all, the 7 types of language. So when I first received, I usually receive these as a transmission and then I go work with it myself before I come and share with you. And as I'm working through it, I do a lot of benefit of hindsight and I'm able to share with you some real examples of my own life to anchor what I share. So when I sort of wrote down 7 types of languages, I thought, well, there are many more types of languages, There's French, there's German, there's Hindi, there's, Punjabi, Russian. And it was like, well, there's obviously something else that is wishing to communicate itself through this phrase, 7 types of language. So the first one is the language of love. This is actually the language of being human. Humans are love. That when you start being human, you are being love. The innate vibration of us in this human form is love. So what does it mean? A type of language called love. It is this language that actually does not require a spoken word at all. This is the being language. It literally is something that is communicated by how we are being. You've heard me often say about being present. Give yourself the best present you possibly can give, which is the present of your own presence. When you are being present, you are actually communicating the whole and completeness of you, and you are communicating with this language of love. The love language opens you up to receiving love as much as it takes away any fear that you may have about sharing love. It allows you to simply be in this state of love. This is the language that babies communicate. When they are born with the love language, and they are communicating that. This is what they are born with first and foremost, the love language. I then saw, as I went through the 7 types of languages, that there were many other types of languages that start to evolve as the baby grows. So each one of us in our adult form, we totally, completely get and have access to and have experience with the love language. There's a very beautiful act of love making that is talked about, in many books that talk about tantric love making. And it is quite profound when you experience it, because it is all about communicating with each other through the love language. Now, when you are when you are presencing yourself with your own presence, you immediately become a very rampant communicator. And the communication is through the love language. There's a beautiful exchange of the vibration of love that starts to occur. And it's an exchange of giving and receiving, and just the perfect harmonized giving and receiving. The love language puts you in a state of harmony. It is the perfect yin and yang harmonization of your masculine and your feminine. And you can, if you're a woman, in a woman's form, express your femininity without fear. And if you're a man, you can express your sacredness as a masculine when you are communicating in this language of love. So when I look back, I thought, okay, this feels pretty amazing. Just even thinking about it, I was starting to get goosebumps. So I just thought, okay, let me look at where I have consciously experienced this. And really, the times that came to me were times that I spent with my grandkids, really in their early days. The one I was there at the, just straight after his birth. The other one I was there 5 weeks after he was born. And we spent the first 3 months together. And I saw that the only language that we were exchanging, I was feeling what this baby was feeling, and this baby was also sort of experiencing my presence. And they would smile when my intention was for that baby to smile, and I was, going goo goo gaga with the baby. What was that? There was no need for any sound. It was just simply presencing myself, and the baby was presencing itself. And that's what was going on. I travel the world, and many times I'm traveling to places, or I'm staying in places where I'm with the local people who don't speak English, don't speak Hindi. So there's no language, no words that we can understand. It is simply the presencing of my presence and communicating in this language of love. And that, like a light bulb went on for me, and I realized that, when I went to Bali, if you read my B book, I talked about those famous 3 weeks where I go to Bali for 3 weeks, and I choose to stay there for 9 years, and my journey of spiritual awakening began. And I entered the resort where I'm the only guest. And that itself feels awkward, but I was like too ill, too jet lagged to go out or move anywhere. So I stay there, and um, I'm the only guest, and Balinese people love to serve. Their communication, we'll talk about that a little bit, their communication when they don't have the words is this language of love. So it felt extremely awkward because I wasn't used to this scale of attention. Because there I am sitting there, contemplating or writing something, and they come over with a papaya. I haven't ordered it, or they come over with a coconut water. I haven't ordered it, but I'm like fidgeting, thinking, oh, maybe I should order something, and there it is. And initially, I just said, oh no, it's okay, I don't want it, but I just thought this is like too uncanny that somebody's like heard me, even though I'm only thinking something. And then I felt too encroached upon my private space. They weren't really. I mean, I'm sitting on a table, and they are at the edge of the table. They were not in my face. They were just presenting something that in case I wanted. And the moment I said no, I don't want it, I saw the eyes becoming teary, and them stepping back, and it's okay, madam, sorry. Then I realized, what am I doing? I use words to communicate my embarrassment, actually, and they were just simply communicating with this language of love. And of course, we couldn't understand. They weren't speaking any English at all, and of course, they weren't speaking any Hindi either. So our communication then simply became one of love, where when I stopped using words, all I could do was, just hold my hands and say thank you to them. And they had this big beaming smile on their face. There was no need for any words. It was a beautiful exchange of love, giving and receiving. And it was through that exchange, that I had that somewhat crazy and somewhat wonderful experience where I started having those like gremlins in my forehead, and I was sitting with my head down on the table, feeling there was no headache. It just felt weird. And a senior staff member from the hotel comes up to me and says, "Is your third eye opening, madam?" And a friend of mine had said to me already, my spiritual mentor had said to me, "Oh, your third eye is being worked on for a higher purpose." So I was like, "What?" Yes. And that's when he took me to Arya, his village's spiritual teacher, and Catherine in Bali. We used to go to Arya for the coconut blessing. So you've experienced Arya. There's no language exchange, right? But it is such a powerful exchange. It is, and it is a giving and receiving, and we could just sit there. Catherine's been there with me, and I would take everybody that went in the journey into miracles with me in Bali. I would take everyone to meet him and do the coconut blessing that he did for me. There were no words. There was just simply love. So, you know, another time that I experienced it was after my partner had a stroke, a really severe stroke, and he, like almost 80% of his brain was damaged in that stroke. And however, I mean, he recovered quite a lot of it. There's still some parts that are still a problem. But at that time, after about 2 months into the stroke, he came home for a short while. He could not use words, he could not write. And our communication, I mean, it's like I just felt that as if the love between us had become even deeper. It had become even more accentuated. It's as if we understood each other so well, even though the words were not being used, and it made me realize that words were in many times coming in the way because we would use words and then the other person is thinking how to react back in the form of words. Whereas here, there were no words. If I use words, he would attempt to understand them and he would then not be present. Or when he attempted to use words, I would be like focusing on what might he be communicating about? Because it was quite a difficult condition where what he was thinking was not what was coming out of his mouth. So then we decided we're just going to pretend that we are some foreigners using this strange language and simply communicate this language of love. We would go out to coffee shops and stuff and sit and communicate and just laugh our head off, you know. God knows what he was saying and what I was saying. We were just having fun. And yet, the connection and the communication between us was profound. I mean, he was like a captain of industry in his time. And then, of course, everything changed for him. And then childlike wonderment appeared for him. And everybody that knew us before, including people who were working for him for years, as well as many of our friends, basically would say that, he's just become so wonderful. There's such an endearment in him, as opposed to feeling sorry for what had occurred. He seemed like so jolly and jovial and so present every time that it automatically made you present. Even our intimate times became even more amazing. It was like we were reliving, the wonderment that we had when we got infatuated with each other. It was just the communication with this type of language, the language of love. So the key thing to know, the way you access this type of language is simply by being present. And being present in your presence. When you are present in your presence, when you are with other people, you automatically be present to them. Language of love, this type of language of love, is simply an exchange of being, of beingness. No words required. No expressions required either. The second type of language is touch. Like, it's very tactile. There are many people who like a lot of touch. So they like communicating with this type of language of touch. And it's, I'm not a very touchy-feely person myself. And I often would get put off when people would want to hug or even shake hands. I was, namaste was fine until I got the grasp that different people communicate and connect in different ways. For many, their connection doesn't occur until touch occurs. So once you understand what type of language is best suited for you, you can be you can be mindful of using it, but also understanding that there are different types of languages that people are communicating with. So words is one thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about the activations in a moment. And I have to keep track of time, yes. We'll talk about activations in a moment. The main thing to remember here is that there are these different types of languages. Touch is literally touch with your with your with your hands or legs or whatever. There's a feeling of touch that is required. It's a very important way in which dogs particularly like to communicate. They like their modus operandi of communication is with humans particularly is touch. They communicate themselves, but how they know that they are being received and they are being accepted, with love is through our touch. A lot of animals have formulated in their own minds that the way they receive feedback from humans is through the touch of humans. Dogs in particular are connected to touch. Horses, on the other hand, communicate with the third type of language. So if I take a baby as a baby, just looking at my grandson, he's 2 now. Initially, he was just in this pure presence of love. Within days, it becomes sensitive to touch. So it learns the language of touch. So we are learning these 7 languages. And all of these 7 languages are taught to us, and we learn it within the first 7 years of our life. We, in fact, master all 7 of these. And then we choose which is the one that is our preferred language. But we are taught all 7 of them. And we experience each of these 7 in quite an in-depth way as we are growing up in those first 7 years of our life. So touch starts to become activated in a few days after a baby is born, where you can soothe it with your touch. Prior to that, it is only communicating with the language of love. Now, the interesting thing that I got is they are not mutually exclusive. They can be communicated with at the same time. So become aware for yourself. Like, in the case of the Balinese people, their communication is primarily the language of love. At least most of them. Touch is not so important there. And I don't know if it is cultural. I haven't done enough analysis to talk about it, but certainly the local people who I lived with, for 9 years while I was in and out of Bali, actually having a home there. So I had all my team that looked after the home, and all of the services in the home were all local people. They were primarily about this language of love. You didn't see them hugging each other or anything either, but they were so fully present all the time. And I know for a fact that there are many, many, many people for whom you are received once they're able to touch you. A hug is really important to them. A physical hug is extremely important to them. So their primary language of choice is touch. So you examine it for yourself. I know how insensitive I was when I would say, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Well, it wasn't okay for the person who wanted to hug me. For me to say it's okay, wasn't okay. But I could have communicated with, allowing that hug to take place, or even sharing that I'm a little uncomfortable with hugs. But I do appreciate that you like hugging. Can we just hold hands? I could have suggested that. There are times when the touch language is the perfect language of communication, even if you're not the hugging kind. I recall when I left London to go to Bali, when I went to live in Perth, Australia for a few years, and then Bali for 9 years. I came back to London 5 years after having left it. So for 5 years, I didn't return to London. And I returned to London to attend the Milken Summit, would you believe? But anyway, I came back to London and I stayed with my dear friend Gina, and we used to run the Women Are Gathering community in London. So we invited many of our friends one evening, and we were all seated around the table, and everybody was talking about the sort of stuff we loved talking about when we would meet before I went away to Bali. And everybody's talking about that. And to me, it's just a lot of words and a lot of noise. And I'm looking around, and my conscious mind was going, my God, I'm not going to have any friends anymore. Because I cannot understand why this kind of discussion is even interesting. And I had nothing to say. I couldn't even smile because I was actually feeling very conscientious about the sadness that was building up in me. And a friend of mine, Tokes, who comes here quite often, and she's certainly there in Beyond Meditation, she was sitting next to me. And she heard my words, even though I wasn't speaking it, and she just held my hand under the table. And even me, who's not very tactile, actually, that was huge communication. I really got that she was saying, it's all right. It's all going to come together. Don't worry. She didn't say a word because we were in the middle of various conversations that were happening. We didn't say anything to disrupt the flow of communication that was occurring around the table. But just that simple holding of my hand, literally, like my part of me just wanted to escape from there. I couldn't physically escape because the whole gathering was there to welcome me. But by that time, I knew how to escape at a soul level, step out of the situation, and my presence would be gone. And by Tokes simply touching my hand, this brought me in, and I was able to be fully present. The conversation changed. So whilst my mind was running at 100 miles an hour saying, what is going on here? Are these really my friends now? I was so excited to meet them. I loved them so much. And I couldn't relate to anyone. Then the moment I became present, they became present. To maybe we ought to, explore a different kind of conversation. And my friend Gina said, oh, let's pull some cards. And that was great. We pulled up some Doreen Virtue goddess cards and stuff, and read each other's messages, and that shifted simply. So there were no words that I said, no words that Toke said, but our communication was so strong that it became a communication into the group. Truly, language is to humans as water is to fish. It was all around everyone. The third type of language is sensory, where the language is the communication is occurring through your senses. Horses, this is their preferred type of language, sensory. If you've done any work with horses, if you are out of sorts, the horse will immediately be out of sorts. And because a horse is always stationed in its truth, and it's very sensitive to us as humans. When we are in our truth, they remain in their truth, and they're totally fine. They'll come to you. They'll even roll over in the mud. They become so comfortable. I remember my first encounter with a horse was when I went to meet a friend of mine, and she was a corporate executive who did the journey into miracles, and everything transformed for her. During the journey, she was the head of a department in a mining company, and very, very busy, super busy head of department, had no time for anything. And one of the actions she took on when she discovered her source mastery was to return to her childhood love, which was to be with horses. And he bought this horse that was being looked after in a stable. So the first time I visited her again from Bali, she took me to meet Boo Boo, her horse. And my first encounter was, my God, this is a huge being. It is quite large. It's so muscular and so strong. And it was very happy with her. So when I came into the stables, there was my conscious mind was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go and say hello to this horse, and it's so strong. And what if it kicks me and stuff? And of course, I breathed into it, put it to one side, returned to my source, came back into my presence, and just simply went there. So my preferred language is love. So I just was simply there in my type, using my type of language of love. And this horse just like literally rubbed itself against me. And it was just there. It was so like it was running around the arena with her in the center. And I went into it, and it was running around still. And then it walked to me and then just rubbed itself against me and then just stayed there for quite a bit. And then it started walking as if it was guiding me to walk with it. It was quite beautiful. I go visit horses in Dubai quite a lot. I mean, they really are very much into horses in Dubai. And often I go and do meditation with the horses now in Dubai, and I'll just sit there. The stables will bring a couple of horses, just leave them around wild in this particular ground, and I'll just stay there and I'll be meditating, and the horses, some of them start rolling in the mud, and it's just wonderful to see that communication. And I mean, sometimes when I'm stuck with a problem, I often go and be with the horses because I'm able to activate all of my sensory system when I'm with the horses. Because when I'm able to communicate in my language of love, and the horse is communicating in its language, which is sensory, I'm able to utilize my eyes, my ears, my nose, my tongue, my skin as the sensory organs that they are. My eyes show me what is actually being shown as opposed to what I'm seeing consciously. My ears decipher what's actually being communicated. And what am I actually smelling here in this scenario that doesn't feel quite right? What is the source of that? I'm able to pick that up. What's that flavor that I'm not able to put my hand on in this situation that I'm present to, I'm able to pick that up. Because our sensory system, organ system, was given to us to communicate in this type of language, which is sensory. You know, many a times we go into an environment, you go into a home, especially if you've been looking for homes, you know, a lot of the time our decision is made based on this sensory system. And at first glance, it may look like really good, but then when you go and visit it a couple of times, there's something off. You don't know what that is. And you decide not to take it. Or you override it and take it. And you know, then some ahas happen about why it didn't feel right in the first place. So we have this sensory type of language that we communicate with. The fourth type of language is rhythm. This is where music comes in. This is where dance beats come in. This is where you, even if you can't hear anything and people are like swaying in a kirtan and you can't hear anything or you can't understand the language, it is the rhythm that you're communicating with. This is exactly why the mantra type of meditation, where people are just using Sanskrit mantras or some indigenous language chants, has become so popular. It is the rhythm communication that is taking place. The rhythm communication is the communication that communicates with our field. It is a cellular communication. It is the language of vibrations. So when I talk about words, you know, every word has an innate vibration. It has its own rhythm. Trying is so trying. It's exhausting. The moment you use the word trying, you're in the rhythm of exhaustion, and tiredness as a cloud descends. And every time you try whatever it is that you said you're going to be trying, actually doesn't lead to any conclusion. You just keep trying it. Because the rhythm language is what is driving how you are communicating. You know, I also say, whatever your energy signature is, whatever you're vibrating, people receive that in your communication. They'll receive it in your text messages, they'll receive it in your emails. What are they receiving? They're receiving the rhythm of you in that vibe. You know, you've also heard me talk about this, my experience with Dadi Janki. She was 93, and then I think she died at 103 or just before 103rd birthday. And she was 93 when I first met her. And I go into the Royal Festival Hall, and there are thousands of us. And this very short Indian woman comes on the stage, and there's so much noise and hustling and bustling. She walks on the stage, and she just stands there looking around, not saying a word, and it's pin drop silence. We could hear our breath. It was so quiet. She was completely communicating in the rhythm language. I attended I visited her in Mount Abu, which is where they have their center, and there were 35,000 people in the audience. So that was the maximum that could fit into the auditorium. And she comes in on her wheelchair on the stage. At this point, she's 102 years old. She comes in, 101-year-old. She comes in on the wheelchair, and then she stands up and she does the same thing. It's not just 10 minutes, it's 20 minutes. Because there's so many of us, and she's just looking at different sections of the room. And when she's looking towards you, you feel she's looking into you. And it was the rhythm language. She was perfectly in her rhythm, and it immediately put us into our rhythm. And then it became this wonderful rhythmic exchange of very deep communication with no words. If you've ever learned dancing, I've learned dancing, ballroom dancing, and I learned to do the tango. I didn't become an expert at it, but my first experience with the tango, this guy was, there was a TV show called Strictly Come Dancing, and he was one of the choreographers of that. So he was our dance teacher, and he said, "Come on, Mynoo, I'm going to teach you the tango, and I'm going to demonstrate it for the class through our dance together." And I'm like, "This is crazy," and because it's such a vigorous dance, and I wasn't doing ballroom dancing very well. Phil and I were stepping on each other's toes. This guy is going to make me do tango, and he began. The music comes on, and he began, and he just says, "Just simply follow me." And I did follow him. And anybody looking at it would have said, "Wow, you really know the tango." I did not know the tango at all. But I followed his instructions. I was following. And my body became graceful. It became like sensuous. It was in perfect rhythm because his communication was not words then. When the music began and we got on the dance floor, we were simply communicating in the language of rhythm. That's what happened. This is a very deep pearl of wisdom, and it would be great for you to examine each type of language and see which is your preferred one. You'll identify that. But also know that you are trained in all of these as you're growing up in your first 7 years of your life. The fifth type of language is a language of gifting. There are some people who love, their way of communicating is gifting and giving gifts and receiving gifts, both. But particularly they love giving gifts, and it often is very conscious. They love doing it. And I know certain people like that. There's a very dear person. She's quite regular in many of my sessions, and she's going through a particular personal time right now, so she's not been coming online that often. But every time I go see her, she's always got all these gifts for me, and I'm like, initially it would be I don't use many of these things anymore, but her joy of sharing her love with me is through gifting. And we can say it's very material, and it isn't. I mean, every gift is so imbued with love that all I have to do is to simply receive it. And that's the communication that we have. So, just notice. I'm very present to like I'm here now I've got my two grandkids and my daughter-in-law's brother, and he's got his kids, and there are several other of their friends that are there. And I was noticing yesterday we had some of their friends over. There was one particular girl, she was into gifting, and everybody else is playing other games, and her way of communicating and connecting was through gifts. So she brought all of these gifts and was actually really disturbed because everybody really wanted to get on and keep playing rather than open the gifts and give her feedback. But she was feeling really sad that nobody was talking to her. They actually were talking to her. It's just that they took her gift and put it to one side to open later. But it's useful to just be aware of it, when you're interacting with people, or even if where you're at. If you're the gifting one that loves communicating through gifting, then be aware that others may not have that type of language as their preferred language. So you can still take your gift and share it appropriately, not expecting them to, not communicate in the way they prefer to communicate. The sixth type of language is amassing. There are some people that love amassing things. like really collecting. They love receiving. And it is amassing anything. It could be amassing information, amassing knowledge, amassing, um, you know, objects, amassing anything. That's the way they communicate, through amassing. You can totally get what type of communication is there. Like there's some people you visit, there's very little that's there in their home, and it feels very homely. It feels wonderful. There are some where you go and there isn't a surface that is empty. There's something or the other that is there everywhere. And you still feel really homely. Even though it feels too cluttered, you still feel very homely. And they so proudly talk about their latest collection. And I know I've been guilty of saying to some of my friends, my God, you don't want another collection, do you? Well, her communication, her language is amassing. So she does want another collection. She doesn't see that every surface is full. She just goes into the story of where these objects came from. Everywhere she looks, there is a story there of what's there. They don't like getting rid of clothes, and including wealth. They're great accumulators as well of wealth. And if you keep forcing yourself to let me help you declutter, they actually don't see the clutter. So you go declutter in your own head. I don't need your help with decluttering. What's there to declutter? What am I going to throw away? This piece I can't throw away because look, this is what happened. This is what occurred, which is where this came from. We can all relate to having some people like that in our lives. And there's a very dear friend of mine, every time I visit this particular part of the world, she wants me to come and stay with her. And every time I go, there is less and less space to walk about. But she says, your bed is perfect. And I still have the Chinese antique chest in your room, which is full. So I only can live with my suitcase. But you walk in, the place feels so welcoming, despite not having much floor to walk on. And she's got many more stories to share about what has occurred and where this came from or where that came from. Everything is often connected to an important date. Well, that's the language, that she communicates with. Now, there is a way in which you can support them to get a little bit more order in their amassing, but don't think you know better, because they're communicating in a different language to yours. You will see, when I see my friend, the amassing language communicator, she is completely present when she is surrounded by all of these things that she's got. There is an order to her clutter already. She's like, why would I move this from here to there? But these things go together. They come from the same time in my life. So it's like, yeah, she actually does have an order. The seventh one is relating. In this language, everything is in relationship to another. And it could be another human being. It could be a project. They're always relating. So sometimes we notice certain people are always comparing themselves to others. And it's not about that they're comparing themselves. It's just that their preferred type of language of communication is a relating type. So for them to make sense of anything, they have to relate it. And that relate could be to someone else or to an environment or whatever it may be. And when you allow people to communicate in their preferred language, not compromising on your preferred language of communication, the connection is instantly very deep. Instantly very deep. And then you don't need to talk so much. A lot of the time, the relating ones talk a lot. because they are trying to make sense of what is occurring. And the relating takes place through words for them. But you can see out of the 7, there is one which requires a lot of words. Most of the others require no words. Given that it is the case, it's no surprise that when you go for a walk in nature and you don't communicate with words at all, you're actually really receiving the presence and this non-verbal communication from nature itself. So when you go into nature and you're not using words, you slowly, with every step you take, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into your innate vibration of being love. The trees are communicating, and you're allowing the trees to come in. And they are communicating in their vibration of okayness. Okayness combined with love, which is an amplifying frequency, amplifies okayness. So if you're in a state of anxiety, that anxiety starts to disappear because you feel okay. And you're becoming true to yourself because you're now vibrating the vibration of love. So words is a very small aspect of language. Now, it's important to understand these 7 types of languages first. Now let's look at the 7 activations. These activations are accentuated and bring in and are brought forth with inspired velocity when you use words to language. And we only have like 6 minutes. So I'm going to go through the 7 activations. You will need to do your own examination. And we are going to do a series on manifestation after we finish the 108 Pearls of Wisdom, interlaced with the 12 the work that I announced last time. We are going to once a month have a deep dive into manifestation, and we will go through these activations in greater depth then. So the 7 activations that get invoked through language and words accelerate, bring velocity to these activations. The first one is wonderment. Now, even before I talk about wonderment or anything else, what I want you to know is, I used to say to myself, if only I could develop the power where my words give me my world. I say and it occurs. And I embarked on this very excitedly on this journey of spiritual awakening. And in this journey, I realized, actually, my words do give me my world. They always have, they always will, they always, and they always do. That is true of you also. So once I became aware of that, I wanted to understand words even more. And that's where this revelation that every word has an innate vibration came about. So given that language invokes and activates wonderment, what you can benefit from for yourself is to identify words that you use when you are in a state of wonderment. And you can bring in those words in your thought or in your talking to activate wonderment when you are speaking your language. So for example, I go into wow. Wow is my wonderment word, So yesterday, my grandson was teaching me he was actually teaching me all these tricks that he had learned. And no, Mynoo, you do it like this, and you bend your hand this way and that and stuff. And we were playing with the balloon. He says, we're going to play this game where with this hand, you kick the balloon like this, and with this hand, you kick it like this. And it gives you a sense of rhythm of using your hands as you're running around up with the balloon. And I'm like, wow, Elliot. And he was very serious about it. And I just wanted to bring some wonderment back into this. And I said, wow, Elliot, this is really cool. It's so true. It's getting me to wake up. I'm not so sleepy anymore, you know. Wonderment was back there. So find out what is that wonderment word that you can language from time to time to bring that back in any situation. The second activation is vitality. Again, what is that vitality word that can bring that back? I mean, you know, I had this long flight, and before the flight, there was rioting that was happening in the place that where my home was and the area near the airport. So I decided to, even though my flight was early in the morning and I would have had to leave in the middle of the night, I decided to actually leave in the middle of the day and brave through all the police checks and go and stay at a hotel by the airport. So my journey to Berlin began like, I don't know, 26 hours it took for me from the time I left home. It was a long drive because there were lots of police checks and stuff. So I was quite exhausted yesterday by the time I got here. The kids were excited and they wanted to show me all this stuff, you know. So I decided that if I say I'm going to rest for 10 minutes, it won't be 10 minutes. I'll wake up in time for the Pearl of Wisdom. So I decided to use my vitality breath. It wasn't a word, it was breath, you know, and my vitality word is presence. You'll have yours, whatever that is. The third activation is clarity. You can use your words to completely clutter yourself. I am confused. You've given yourself the identity of confused. You're a confused being. That is your identity. Of course, clarity disappears. I feel confused and I'm going to get clear. You know, that allows you to get clear that where you're going for is clarity, even though you may not be clear right now. Fourth is certainty. I'm just going to read the list now and not give you examples. But fourth is certainty. Fifth is thriving. Sixth is the knowing that gets activated. And seventh is the amplification that gets activated. So when you bring words to the type of language that is your preferred language, and you can be discerning with the words you use, depending on what type of an activation you wish to experience in that moment or in that conversation or in that environment that you're in. So find what is your wonderment word, your clarity word, your certainty word. It may be one or two, and weave it in, and you will see that activation taking place instantly. With that, back to you, Catherine.
Wow, that is such a great word. And what a beautiful pearl of wisdom. You know, such a surprise. I was totally off track with where I thought this pearl of wisdom was going. So thank you for that amazing point. You know, we think about language as words, and it is words, but there's just so much more. And I love these 7 activations that you've left us with. Our homework before next week is to use this and become more clear. Wonderment, vitality, calming, clarity, certainty, thriving, and I think amplification. So if you didn't catch all those, watch the live. We'll come back next week. We need another Pearl of Wisdom on this. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
What a pleasure. Thank you, Mynoo. Love to you all, and we'll see you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.